Hello and welcome to our review of the new for 2023 Alfa Romeo Stelvio. Let's see what they've changed. Now, fans of the Stelvio design might have noticed that it's got the new headlights that Alfa Romeo is rolling across its models. Basically, it's got a three-part design up front, which uses some inspiration from old Alfa Romeos of yesteryear and also takes from the Tonale as well. And at the back, the taillights have also got a new LED design. So overall, what they've done is just made a pretty design even nicer. And also, under the bonnet, you no longer get the least powerful engine options for either the petrol or the diesel. So if you go for the petrol, like this car is, you've got 280 horsepower to play with. So with so little change to what the underside of this car is all about, the suspension and the engine, well, it does feel predictably very familiar, but that's not a bad thing. It still rides very nicely. There's definitely a bit of weight to be felt when you put it over some of the larger bumps. You can feel this is an SUV. It's not quite as smooth as the Giulia, for example. And this particular car, this Veloce, doesn't have the two-stage adaptive damping that Alfa Romeo offers as an option, but crucially, it still feels like an Alfa Romeo. The Stelvio, like the Giulia, really has put Alfa Romeo back on the map. And well, this car now is getting a little bit old, and its rivals like the BMW X3, for example, have been updated more recently. They've got newer interiors and therefore they feel a little bit more up to date. But when it comes to just driving, just like that Giulia, this Stelvio is a really nice thing to steer. And now, with this car coming as standard with 280 horsepower, the bottom engine has been dropped. The petrol car does feel pretty nippy actually. It's definitely quick to get going. There's loads of traction from the four-wheel drive system, and it's quite entertaining to rev it out as well. As I can demonstrate now, let's click it back down. The 8-speed ZF gearbox, which, by the way, is still really nice and quick to shift. Yeah, it gets up and goes. It gets up and goes. It's quick enough, but as you'd expect, it's a bigger, heavier car than the Giulia Saloon, so it does feel like the engine is a bit muted and a little bit held back by the weight, but otherwise it revs really smoothly through the range. This gearbox shifts nice and quickly up and down the ratios, and these paddles remain really nice to use. So much better than the fiddly ones you get on rival cars. Now, if I click into dynamic mode, this car with its passive damping, it makes no difference to the suspension, but it does sharpen up the accelerator's responses a little bit, and it should make the gear shifts a little bit quicker as well, although there's not exactly much space for that because they're rapid as they are. So let's just tip it into a bend. Woo-hoo-hoo! So much grip, so much traction, and there's a bit of body roll in this passive dampered car, but it's very much under control. It just leans over into its outside edges, but then actually just remains really stable. And this road is quite bumpy as well, so while it was leaning over, the suspension had to deal with some bumps, and it did it really, really well. It's very, very confidence inspiring. And you can start to play with the balance a little bit on slipperier surfaces. When I've been pulling out in some of these gravelly areas here, if you put your foot down, you can feel a little kick from the back where the power is being put down to the rear wheels. But on a grippy surface like we have today, the car just feels nice and planted and composed, which is good and familiar stuff and very relevant for this class. Now let's click it back into advanced efficiency mode just to see how the engine feels when it's trying to save fuel. Now firstly, I can tell you that the accelerator feels longer, standard stuff, and I can see actually when I'm coasting down the hill, the engine or the clutch is dipped and the engine basically goes to tick over. So yeah, that's standard stuff. Nothing new there really. So on the roads, really this thing feels very familiar indeed. Just now you've got a little bit extra muscle under the bonnet as standard, which I'm sure many owners will appreciate. But it does fall short in the same areas that the Giulia, its sister car, falls short. I mean, the interior now, while the seating position for an SUV especially is very nice, you sit nice and low in the car if you want to, although you can raise it up. The steering and the steering wheel, everything you touch and control is really nicely put together. The modulation on the brake pedal is pretty good as well, but you're just lacking when it comes to tech. We've got the digital instrument cluster now that Alfa Romeo is rolling out across all of its models. You can customize the menus and the displays. I always leave it in the vintage setting because I think it looks the best. And you've got now latest software for the infotainment screen in the middle, but it's nothing on its main rivals. BMW's new slab infotainment systems, Mercedes as well in the GLC. All of those cars all have got technology that just leaves this one feeling a little bit behind inside. It's got everything you need, but it doesn't feel quite up to date. It doesn't feel 2023 in these areas. But I guess to some extent that won't matter too much because buyers of the Stelvio have always probably taken a slight hit in those areas compared to rivals and chosen this car because they like the way it drives. And I can tell you, and I'm happy to say, it still drives really well. All right, so yeah, this car does feel a little bit familiar, and that's no bad thing. It handles and steers great, and with the increased power for the base level engine, it does mean now that it moves a bit quicker down the road. But of course, it does also feel a little bit behind in other areas. The infotainment system and just the graphics and generally the interior just can't keep up with the latest from this car's main rivals. Really, what this car is all about, and what I think it's always been about, is that it drives like an Alfa Romeo, despite being a practical family SUV. So I'm still a big fan, but it might have its work cut out to convince you lot. But what do you think? Let us know. Tell us in the comments, would you take this over the BMWs and the Audis of this class, and of course the Porsche as well? Or do you think Alfa Romeo still has it because it drives so nicely? And of course, if you enjoyed this video, do click the thumbs up button, and if you haven't already, click that subscribe button, because we're going to be here again with many more cars.